Hi, I'm Don Rich. Welcome to this episode of Rich Insights. The topic we have for today is related to the U.S. consumer, right? The U.S. consumer is terribly important to the U.S. economy. The better the U.S. economy does, the better the corporate earnings are, the better the stocks tend to perform. So again, we're not going to focus so much today on the current state of the U.S. consumer, but we want to look forward and see if we can get some indication of what things might look like in the future. All right. Now, historically, to give you some idea of how important the U.S. consumer is, historically, the U.S. consumers accounted for about 70% of U.S. GDP. Again, that's a long run number. Over the last 5 years, however, that number's actually been over 80%. The U.S. economy is going as the U.S. consumer goes, literally. All right? The three biggest components of GDP are consumer spending, government spending, and corporate spending. All right? The corporates have not been spending. The government doesn't have money to spend, and so that leaves the consumer with the lion's share of weight to carry. So anyway, with that, of course, the U.S. consumer is so important, and to get some idea of what things might look like in the future, we have to think about the consumption pattern, right? Most of the things we see on the store shelves today obviously didn't originate in the U.S. They were imported, all right? And so keeping track of imports and keeping track of things like railroad activity are terribly important. So the way things work is that most products in the U.S. are actually imported to our deep water seaports, and the two biggest ones are Los Angeles and L.A. And those two ports over time have essentially become one. They've grown together. But they are by far the most important in the U.S. So every month a report becomes available. I track a report that tracks those what are called container counts, right? How many container counts are on those barges? How many containers are on those barges? Now, one container is the size of a semi-truck bed, right? They literally take them off of the barges, and they can either put them on a railroad car or they can put them on the trailer of a semi-truck. So you should have some familiarity with what we're talking about when we say a container count. So again, what we want to do is just look at the evidence, because whatever's coming into those ports is then going to have to be delivered from the West Coast across the United States, generally by railroad cars, and that's what ends up in our store shelves. So let's move to the data right now and take a look at the charts. Here we have the monthly inbound container counts at Long Beach and Los Angeles. Again, the two largest deep water ports in the U.S. And what I like to focus on this chart is actually the black line here. This is the 12-month moving average of these monthly observations, right? The red observations are the observations each month. And obviously we have some volatility each month, so the 12-month moving average is much more well-behaved. The dotted black line up here is just the most recent observation, which you can see here was the end of December. All right, so focusing on this black line, obviously when this thing flattens out, that was a very mild recession we had in early 2000, 2001, 2002 recession. And then, a steep decline was the 2008 recession, right, when consumption declined very rapidly and very sharply. And of course, what we see right now is not encouraging, all right? So what do we do with that information? Well, it tells us that U.S. retailers are not ordering as many goods right now. All right. And by the way, we looked at the container count. We could have also looked at the railroad data. We would have seen the same thing. So The goods are not coming into the ports, they're not being transported across. So right now, the consumption numbers for the U.S. consumer look fine. So we're talking a few months out, right? These companies have warehouses, storehouses where they stockpile goods, some inventory. And so they can get along for a while to support the consumption patterns without ordering a new product. But eventually, of course, that product, the inventory gets depleted and the product has to be ordered. So I would say, as we look out 3-4 months here, that the retailers are telling us that they expect a decline in consumption. A decline in consumption means we should be looking at some softer GDP numbers coming up, which means we should be looking at some lower corporate earnings. What does all that mean from an investment perspective? We've got some storm clouds on the horizon. All right, the storm may not materialize, but there's certainly clouds on the horizon, and that suggests you should probably pull your risk profile in a little bit, take your risk down a little bit, go into some more conservative sort of things. Again, don't go nuts. This isn't a cry for the end of the world. This is a blip on the horizon, but it could materialize into something much more. So you want to think of this as a series of steps to take your risk profile down a bit and start the process. And then if the more and more storm clouds that materialize, obviously, we'll get more and more defensive as we go across time. So that's our message for today. I'm Don Rich. You've just experienced a rich insight. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.